Now, This Week with Bob Mueller on News 2.
This week,
it has been a long year or so for Metro Nashville Public Schools.
The director of Metro Schools outlines plans for the return to the classroom. You will hear from Dr. Adrienne Battle.
And with increasing infection rates leads to increasing hospitalizations, increasing patients on ventilators, and increased deaths.
Tennessee doctors are worried Governor Lee is not doing enough to stop the spread of the Delta variant and increase vaccinations. More in our This Week cover story.
I was grabbed, beaten, tased, all while being called a traitor to my country.
The House investigation of the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol by Trump supporters begins with graphic accounts of the hand-to-hand combat between demonstrators and police.
So many people don't know him, and many people who read the book will be introduced to him for the first time.
For the decade of the 90s, Tom Osborne was the ABC News United Nations correspondent. You will hear from the author of The Politics of War, My 10-Year Journey with Peter Jennings. Hello again, and welcome to another edition of This Week. For the second week in a row, Tennessee doctors have concerns with Governor Bill Lee and his response to the surging Delta variant. More in our This Week cover story. But first, a look at the other political headlines of the week. On Capitol Hill, the start of the investigation into the Capitol riot. The January 6th House Select Committee heard from 4 officers who endured the violence of that day. And as ABC's Alex Brachet reports, one officer compared it to a medieval battle.
Today, the harrowing testimony of 4 officers who were among the hundreds who defended the Capitol on January 6, still echoing the halls of Congress. For more than 3 hours, D.C. Metropolitan and Capitol Police testified about the trauma they experienced that day and the scars they still carry.
I was grabbed, beaten, tased, all while being called a traitor to my country.
One man tried and failed to build a rapport with me, shouting, "Are you my brother?" Another takes a different tack, shouting, "You will die on your knees."
No one had ever called me a while wearing the uniform of a Capitol Police officer.
I sustained injuries on both my hands, my left shoulder, my left calf, and my right foot.
Sending this message to lawmakers who have downplayed the violence.
The indifference shown to my colleagues is disgraceful.
GOP leadership boycotted the probe. Emotion from that hearing spilling into other hearings later in the day.
Did you watch the testimony of the Capitol officers who defended our lives on January 6th, or did you not?
It's irrelevant. It's absolutely irrelevant.
Other Republicans dismissed the hearing as partisan.
It was compelling. The people who went into the Capitol, I think, are domestic terrorists. One officer said they were political. Yeah, but I think the commission's a bit political.
But 2 GOP members broke ranks to serve on the bipartisan committee, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. Kinzinger broke down reflecting on the acts of bravery that day.
You talk about the impact of that day. But you guys won. You guys held.
Committee Chairman Benny Thompson said there's still work to be done, and that includes the possibility of subpoenas for people like Leader McCarthy, Ivanka Trump, even former President Trump, though Thompson has not given a date for a follow-up hearing. Alex Brachet, ABC News, Washington.
The Delta variant continues its rapid spread mainly among the unvaccinated, but triggering breakthrough infections among the vaccinated. The CDC is now updating its mask guidance, impacting both those who have received their shots and students headed back to the classroom. ABC's Morgan Norwood has the major details.
As the Delta variant spreads among the unvaccinated and vaccinated, the CDC with a change in the mask guidance for schools and the millions of Americans who have already received their shots.
When we examine the rare or breakthrough infections and we look at the amount of virus in those people, it is pretty similar to the amount of virus in unvaccinated people.
The CDC now urging Americans to wear masks indoors if they're in an area with substantial transmission. The agency also reversing its guidance from 2 weeks ago that said vaccinated students could go maskless in schools. Instead, now recommending universal masking for all teachers, staff, students, and visitors, regardless of vaccination status. Parents from coast to coast protesting the mask mandates in schools.
I cannot stand to see her masked, and she doesn't want to be masked.
And in Washington, mandates for federal workers to be vaccinated or face other protocols could be on the way. That's according to sources familiar with the talks. The announcement could come as early as Thursday, the president sounding off about the spread.
We have a pandemic because of the unvaccinated. There's showing enormous confusion.
Los Angeles now requiring city workers to show proof of vaccination or face weekly testing.
We're facing a real threat, and the only way we'll gain the upper hand is by fighting back.
As the vaccination rates dwindle in areas where cases are surging, the CDC issuing a health advisory urging clinicians to increase vaccinations to prevent surges of new infections that could overwhelm healthcare capacity. In Florida, 15-year-old Paulina Velasquez was planning to get her shots when she got COVID. She's now on a ventilator. Her mom, though vaccinated, experiencing a breakthrough infection.
It was terrifying for me because I said, why me? Why not, why my daughter? Why not me?
Morgan Norwood, ABC News, Los Angeles.
Now to our This Week cover story. Tennessee pediatricians and frontline doctors are alarmed by the increasing number of COVID-19 cases as the start of school nears. Governor Lee says he has no plans to roll back restrictions. Capitol Newsroom reporter Gerald Harris takes a look at what's to come.
More Tennessee pediatricians are calling for masking in schools as COVID-19 cases in the more contagious Delta variant soar, as well as getting a vaccine if you're eligible.
And if you look at the data from the CDC, almost the entire state of Tennessee is in the orange or red zones, meaning substantially and very high rates of COVID transmission.
And because of that, the group of pediatricians is calling on Governor Bill Lee and local school districts to follow the CDC guidelines and require masks to be worn for teachers and students.
We need to get our act together as a state and do what needs to be done to prevent the spread of this virus, which is to require masks as school starts.
Republican Representative Jason Zachary of Knoxville called the new CDC guidance foolish.
Masks, they decrease the amount of bacterial particles that you're breathing into the air surrounding you, but they also decrease the amount of those, particles and the virus particles that you're going to be inhaling into your own body.
Governor Lee says he will encourage vaccinations, but mandating masks is a no, according to his office.
It's not that the mask just protects others, it also will protect you, especially if you've not been vaccinated.
Democrats say Republican lawmakers must step up in the fight against COVID-19.
This governor has sat on the sidelines for far too long, and we've let the political rhetoric take over the conversation way too much instead of finding solutions that's going to really work for people.
And if no action is taken to help prevent the spread of COVID-19 in schools, Dr. Green says the results could be devastating.
It means that our infection rate will go up, and with increasing infection rates leads to increasing hospitalizations, increasing patients on ventilators, and increased deaths. There's no way to put it mildly.
In Nashville, Gerald Harris, News 2.
Welcome back to This Week. I'm pleased to be joined by Tom Osborne, ABC News correspondent from 1987 to 2000, and spent 10 years of his life covering the United Nations, and alongside the great Peter Jennings, his new book, The Politics of War. Mr. Tom Osborne, I am very impressed to meet you because I want to share some Peter Jennings story. You covered this country from the United Nations during a pivotal period of a lot of international stories. That was Peter's forte at the UN. We'll get into all that. What was it like working with Peter Jennings side by side for 10 years?
I'm glad you asked that, Bob, because that's really what I wanted to say in the book. So many people don't know him, and many people who read the book will be introduced to him for the first time. And what it was like was, it was like, as I say in the book, it was like when you pick up the phone and Peter's on the end of it, it's like being on a train. And once you pick that phone up, you're going the same speed he is. And you go until you stop.
He really made his name as a foreign correspondent. He kind of set the pattern for what a foreign correspondent could be. And after the big three, the Frank Reynolds and Max Robinson and Jennings, and that transferred, and when Reynolds died in '83 and Jennings became the anchor, he really focused on international and foreign news much more so and made it a key, and that became part of your partnership with him.
Absolutely. He was what we used to say, he put the world back in world news. Roone Arledge discovered him during the '72 Olympics crisis with the Israelis. That's where he really shone, and he picked him out. And Laroon had the idea of making American news serious news. And so he put Peter right in the middle of that and let him become who he wanted to be.
Some of the stories that took place during that decade are still reverberating because of their impact. And obviously the world changed when 9/11 happened. The world also changed when the Berlin Wall came down in 1989. Talk about how it changed from the minute that concrete started coming down.
Well, it was very dramatic. I was at the ABC studios in New York when it was coming down. And I think I'm not mistaken on this. Peter, it's the first time Peter didn't have his feet on the ground first. I believe Tom Brokaw snatched that moment. Congratulations, Tom.
Got scooped sometimes,
yeah,
it happens.
Did, and Peter made it soon. But it was phenomenal because I was seeing it in real time. And we were, as you know, coming over the wire, the monitors. I was seeing them breaking this down. And it was just a total, it was really the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union, actually.
Probably the biggest story of that decade when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and the first Gulf War happened, the first big war in this country since the removal in Vietnam. And this country rallied around that. It was a massive deal. President Bush immediately rallied the troops. Fort Campbell here close to Tennessee immediately were activated. Talk about what was going on in New York and the United Nations as this country again prepared for war.
Well, actually, I was assigned immediately to the United Nations at the beginning of the Gulf War. And basically, everybody in the ABC Bureau was deployed. I mean, we were all military. We were focused on what the battle was, lately. Peter, of course, was always on the moves of the troops and Saddam Hussein and so on and so forth. So it was like getting the information right as it happened. And of course, at the United Nations, it was very shocking because here was the United States. You see these missiles going over and we're deploying.
The Scud missiles.
We're going to invade. We're going to occupy. I've got Israeli foreign correspondents standing with me. I've got people from Iraq standing with me. We're watching this happen.
One of the things I remember about Peter Jennings was he was an innovator, and during that Gulf War, I'll never forget, I'm sure you remember, he developed the floor map, because a lot of this country didn't understand where these countries were and how they interconnected, and he kind of walked over them and showed this connection. It really told the story, and it showed how he was more, not just a journalist and a broadcaster, he was a storyteller, and he was trying to tell those stories.
That's right, Bob. He really wanted people to understand the story itself. He didn't care so much about the headlines. He was more interested in getting people up to speed. And he had to teach them a lot with several different stories. We'll talk about Bosnia, but he did several specials on Bosnia before people finally caught up.
That was my next question.
Sure.
It was Bosnia-Herzegovina during that time was an absolute travesty, an unmitigated disaster, and just the death toll was massive. Talk about that whole event that took place.
It was a terrible betrayal. I was very close to the president of the Security Council at the time. He was Diego Aria from Venezuela. And I was very close to the ambassador from Bosnia, Mohammed Shakirbi. And I introduced the two of them, and we were both getting information from behind closed doors. And I was giving this to Peter, and what we were hearing was gloom and doom.
Yeah.
The West, the British and the French absolutely would not support any sort of military offerings for Bosnia. They were going to just let them go.
Peter didn't stay in New York. He went and did those stories there, too.
He went there. He was there. In fact, he asked Roone Arledge if he could go, and Roone absolutely would not let him go. It was the siege of Sarajevo. But he went. He said he'd give him 14 hours. Of course, he extended it. And he was in the marketplace when they bombed it. He was like 10 minutes down the road.
Peter Jennings started in 1983 as the main anchor and, of course, passed away in 2005. His death really ended that big three, as it were, with Jennings and Tom Brokaw and the three heads of CBS, ABC, and NBC. And it changed mainly because of the exponential growth of cable industries and the internet and other sources. But that really ended an era, didn't it?
It certainly did, and I think we're seeing the effects of it today. We have so much social media, and there's really no balance to it. There's no big three. There's no Peter out there. In fact, that's one of the things I put in my book. I said, now that Peter's gone, who's going to set these limits? Who's going to be there for us?
What did Peter Jennings leave behind that is going to resonate forever in journalism? And how can future journalists learn from someone who's been gone a while now, but who left such a lasting impression?
I think, first of all, being a human being. He was very, very much a human being, and he cared about people, and he cared what happened to people. So he was basically focused on that. And that was the story for him, and I think that's the most wonderful thing. And he never forgot anyone. I've seen him many times, people from far off lands you never heard of, and they know the restaurant, he knows the restaurant they were, and he knows everything about them.
I had a text relationship with him, and I miss that. And Tom Osborne, I appreciate you sharing your stories of Peter Jennings. Tom Osborne, ABC News correspondent for more than a decade, the author of Politics and War. Thank you very much for your time and your insight.
Thank you, Bob. Great being here.
Stay with us. This Week continues in a moment. Welcome back to This Week. Metro school students return to the classroom on August 10th. Tonight, we hear from the director of Metro Schools about COVID guidance and what returning students can expect in just a matter of days.
Mayor John Cooper and the Metro Council made the largest investment in Metro Schools history in this budget, with an $84 million investment. This will include an increase that will go towards making sure our teachers are the best paid educators in the state of Tennessee. This will be the case at all levels of service for our teachers and will help tremendously for us to retain and recruit the best teachers to ensure ultimately that our children have a great education. We have a lot of progress we need to make with our students. We are recognizing that we must move back to basics to get it right so that we have forward progress and success. We have the data to show exactly what each student needs, and we have committed to families that every MNPS student will be known. We are moving into a period of recovery and then quickly into acceleration, and we have to get the fundamental inflection points right. We are using academic achievement data to drive specific interventions with students. And the data led us to a particular focus on 1st and 2nd grade literacy and 8th and 9th grade numeracy. We are the only district in Tennessee and one of the few in the nation that is allocating a major portion of the federal money directly to schools. School principals are using this autonomy to match these resources to the strategic needs of their school community. We've learned a lot from almost a decade of student-based budgeting, and we have given principals a set of research-based practices, guardrails, to ensure that they're investing these resources wisely. When we look at how families consider their school options, they think about the entire pathway of their child, from elementary through high school and even college. Parents don't think about MNPS as a district. They think about a set of schools that they hope their child attends, and as a result, will need to adapt to them to best improve educational outcomes from the neighborhood context and not from a district central office. At the end of the day, what are we doing this for? We are doing this because we want Nashville's future generations to have productive careers and happy lives. In order to give them the best chance to achieve those goals, we know they have to graduate ready for college. Our earliest indicator of success is 3rd grade reading, and then we build upon that at each transition point. However, we can no longer think of it as ending at high school. We have to take responsibility for our students' success in college. We essentially need to incorporate the college experience into the MNPS experience through releasing a nationwide RFP to colleges and universities to partner with us on facilitating campus tours, tutoring, and mentoring, and helping students feel equipped for the next level of education once they graduate, walk across that stage, and earn a diploma from us. We will start right here with our local colleges and universities, and then expand outward from there. It has been a long year or so for Metro Nashville Public Schools. The pandemic tested us in ways we have never imagined. It challenged us, it stretched us, but we came out stronger, and we will continue to build on this strength. With a great team in the support hub and our schools, a supportive board, mayor and his team, Metro Council, committed parents, and a community that is truly invested in our student success, we are ready for a wonderful new school year ahead.
I want to thank you for spending part of your weekend with us. That will do it for another edition of This Week. I do want to thank my guest, former ABC News United Nations correspondent Tom Osborne. We hope to see you back here next weekend for another edition of This Week. Between now and then, you have a great week.